US up against Chile, folks. It is all on the line as both these sides look to secure a spot in next year's Rugby World Cup. It is the second leg, so essentially winner takes all. Whoever wins goes to the World Cup. Very important Rugby World Cup qualifier game. We're going to go through some lineups, some stats, some predictions, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on how this game is going to pan out and which team ends up booking their spot to France. If you want to watch the game and you're in the US, Flow Rugby is the broadcaster, so I'll put a link down in the description for Flow. They've got this game along with the other July internationals on this weekend. They've got the upcoming Rugby Championship, so they're a good source if you are into your rugby and you're in the US. Last week it was 22-21 over in Chile. Kind of hard to read too much into what was going on in that game because of pretty atrocious conditions, but I mean, one thing is to be said that these teams are a lot closer than what the historical record would show. Like previously, you've got results like USA 71-6, 45-13, 57-9, 64-0. Like there's a lot of big wins to the US over Chile in their even relatively recent history. But whatever these guys have been doing in the SLAR, this Chilean team, which most of the squad plays in the same team, it's certainly helped them turn a corner. They must be getting some good coaching because they've certainly been making good strides. The fact that it was only a 1-point ball game. I know they were at home. They had a really great crowd behind them and, as I said, pretty terrible conditions. But yeah, 1-point ball game compared to where it used to be kind of a 50-40 pointer. For the US, they're back home for this second leg. And that's an interesting one as well because when Chile knocked out Canada, it was the same scoreline after the first leg, but they went away then home. This time they're home and away, so it's going to be tougher for them, especially seeing as they've never beaten the Eagles away from home. They've had one victory in their kind of relatively short history between the sides. For Gary Gold's US team, he's kind of made as minimal changes as he can. I think he's only made 2 changes to the entire 23, and it's the exact same starting 15. So Anu, Taufete, and Mullen are the front row, and I think forwards-wise, they'll be pretty happy with how they kind of bossed things around last week, right? You know, especially with some mauling, they were getting some really good go-forward ball. So I do think that's probably part of the reason he's kept things the same, and also he wants to kind of keep that cohesion of the team playing together. Like, that's one thing the Chilean team does have an advantage. And most of these guys play for the same team, and they're kind of club level. They don't need to kind of force that cohesion, whereas the US guys are playing for all different clubs, some of them in the MLR and some of them across Europe. So getting any kind of cohesion is certainly very beneficial. Peterson and Civetta are the same locks, and Bonasso, Hermajes, and Dolan the same Lucy. So as I said, it's the exact same starting 15. De Haas and McGinty, 9 and 10. McGinty will be hoping for a slightly easier time kicking than last week because, as I said, with the torrential rain and freezing conditions, it was maybe not ideal for him. I mean, I listened to a kind of, what's a podcast with some of the American guys being interviewed, and even for a guy like AJ McGinty who plays his rugby in the north of England where it's pretty cold, even he was apparently complaining about just how freezing it was. So that's kind of how bad it was last week in the driving rain. Campbell and Lopetti at the midfield, Dyer, Yosef are the wingers, and Brachis there at fullback. So yeah, man, it's the same starting team as last week. We have got a new hooker on the bench in place of Pifoletti. Comes Mikey Sosene Feagai, and then Moni Tongahuia comes in as a loose forward replacement. So yeah, only 2 real changes. It's still a 6-2 split, so just the 2 backs in Augsburger and Cardi. Otherwise, like Wigluski, McClellan, Mahoney, and Dam are the other forward replacements. So pretty much steady as she goes for the US guys. For the Chileans, they've taken a very different approach, and they've absolutely rotated the squad about as much as you reasonably can. The front row has totally changed, so the guys who were on the bench last week now start, and then the guys who were starting are on the bench. So total switch. So Luis Escobar and Lastra are the starting front rowers. Orchard comes up from the bench into the second row. I'm assuming that's Orchard in Spanish. Iceman is one of the few guys to keep his jersey number from last week in the second row alongside Sigrid, who's still there at 6, who's captain. Silva's up from the bench at 7. Escobar is into the 23 at number 8. So of the forward pack, it's only 2 guys who started last week who start this week. So much in the way of rotation, fresh bodies. Torrealba is in at 9, who was the bench guy last week, so it's another change. Fernandez does keep his spot at number 10. It will be hard to replace him after that world-class, nobody can tackle him try that he scored last week. That was absolutely phenomenal and made kind of all kinds of highlights reels, as it probably should. Casas is there at 12, which is in addition to the 23. The Garfulik boys, that's Matthias and Nicolas, are 13 and 14. Those guys are not changed. Videla, who did the goal kicking last week, he moves from fullback to left wing. And then Francisco Uroz comes into the 15 jersey. And pretty much every guy from the bench, barring Augusto Sarmiento, are guys who started last week who now dropped to the bench. So, yeah, man, absolute rotation from the Chilean boys. I'm not sure if part of this is because they're playing at altitude in Colorado, and they want to kind of keep things fresh and want to add some impact for the end, or it's just a bit of rotation with some tired bodies. Really not sure. As far as I'm aware, again, according to that podcast, these teams left on the same flight, so they should kind of be as equally adapted to the altitude conditions in Colorado. But yeah, stats-wise, last week the Chilean boys had more run meters, 195 to 119, which is remarkably low. But given the conditions of waterlogged pitch and torrential rain, kind of not surprising. They beat more defenders, the Chileans 16 to 6, but the Mauls 13 to 3. That US forward pack was really trying to get on top in that regard, and the Chileans conceded a lot of penalties, sometimes at maul, sometimes at scrum. It was 15 to 9, so on the wrong side of the ref's whistle. Kicks from hand was pretty high, 31-33, but again, one of those games where you maybe don't want to play with the ball because the conditions are not conducive to it. The Chilean lineout was at 50%, which they'll want to improve. Dry ball might help. And then the US still, even with the wet ball, managed 80%, which is pretty solid. So, yeah, it's at Infinity Park. I think it's an afternoon game in Colorado. I think it's sold out, so that's pretty good news. So, yeah, man, all to play for. Massive, massive game for both these teams. Whoever loses is not out. They're going to go into the repechage with, like, the loser of Hong Kong and Tonga and the African qualifier. I think it was Kenya that lost to Namibia. So, yeah, it's not the end of the road, but obviously you win this one, or in the US's case, draw this one, and you're going to be through. So, yeah, all to play for. Very interesting. Predictions-wise, the USA are 18-point favorites with the Rugby Forecast algorithm, but remember that keeps into, like, it's tracking the old 50, 60-point results that they've had in recent times. So I think it's maybe a little bit optimistic for the US to win by 18 points, but you never know. We'll kind of have to wait and see how these guys back up from last week. The Chileans are absolutely going to be fired up. Hopefully the US fans can be just as kind of passionate as we saw from the Chilean fans last week. Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to this one. Not sure how quickly I'm going to be able to watch it because my power is going to be turned off during the game. They're doing maintenance on the power in my area, unfortunately, on a Sunday. So, yeah, we'll have to find a way somehow. But anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts on this one. How are you backing the US to go through, or are you thinking Chile for the upset? You guys let me know your thoughts, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.